Tonight on Reporting Scotland, defeat for the government as MSPs vote to scrap the legislation aimed at tackling sectarianism in football. The landslip that's closed the main rail line between Glasgow and Edinburgh for a second day, causing more disruption for passengers. The former head of Scotland's police watchdog explains why he reversed a plan to allow the Chief Constable to return to work after he'd met the Justice Secretary. The young boy killed by a falling gravestone in a Glasgow cemetery. An inquiry finds his death could have been prevented. And later in the programme, we meet the skier who's head over heels to be selected for Britain's Winter Olympics team.
We sleekit, cour and timorous beastie. Oh, what a...
And is this the face of Robert Burns? New technology reveals how the National Bard may have looked. Good evening. MSPs have tonight voted in principle to scrap the law that aims to tackle sectarianism in football. By 65 votes to 61, Holyrood backed Labour's James Kelly in his claim that the law had failed and had instead isolated and angered football fans. The move to scrap the law will now be scrutinised further before a final decision is taken. Ministers hope to delay abolition until a new package can be put in place. This from our political editor, Brian Taylor.
It opened in conflict, a touchline confrontation after the old firm Game of Shame 7 years ago. That led to a sectarianism summit and the new law targeting football. But controversy continued, with claims that the legislation pitted the police against supporters. This week in Glasgow, both Celtic and Rangers were in action, and their fans hostile to the act.
There's already laws there to replace it, breach of the peace. I mean, you can make it done for all that anyway, so why did they bring another stupid law in?
Get it scrapped. It's not done any good. It's been an absolute farce from the beginning.
But others in Glasgow see things differently.
One football team fighting with a different football team, it's going to be pandemonium if they scrap it.
Once that's scrapped, do you think they've got a bit of freedom to carry on with their sectarianism, basically?
And always, from some, the backing track. One side singing about the Billy Boys, the other side singing about the IRA. This afternoon, campaigners against the law arrived at Holyrood. They heard James Kelly argue that the Act had fallen well short of its objective.
The Football Act has completely failed to tackle sectarianism. It is illiberal and unfairly targets football fans. It has been condemned by legal experts, human rights organisations and equality groups. It is time to scrap this discredited Act.
The Act goes beyond football to cover threatening communications online. Ministers say vulnerable minorities, such as the LGBT community, would miss that protection. And they say scrapping the Act is a blunder.
Presiding officer, simply going back to where we were before the Act was introduced is retrograde and counterproductive and will do nothing to tackle abusive behaviour at football or protect vulnerable communities.
But in the vote, opposition parties united to defeat the government.
Is yes 65, no 61. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed.
It's a great day for football fans, but we're not quite there yet. And until this absolutely dreadful piece of legislation is removed from the statute book and football fans are treated in exactly the same way as every other citizen, we can't really call ourselves a democracy.
It was an incredible game of football.
In 2016-17, there were 377 charges under the Football Act, inflated by 140 at the Rangers Hibs Cup final. In future, Scotland will have to resort to other legislation.
And Brian Taylor still at Holyrood for us tonight. To be clear, Brian, this won't affect fans going to football matches this weekend.
No, that's absolutely right, Riley. As of tonight, the law is still in place, but it's on its way out. There'll be further scrutiny, further examination of the details of the Act here at Holyrood. But you know what? It could be scrapped by the end of the football season. You can see that the move now from the Scottish Government is mitigation. They're trying to salvage what they can from the proposals, from the legislation, particularly with regard to online communications. They hope perhaps to defer the implementation of repeal until they've got a new package in place, perhaps using proposals from Lord Brackadale, who's examining hate crime legislation in more detail. Now, James Kelly says he'll look at that. He says he'll look in particular at the online provisions, although he points out they haven't been used all that frequently. But his primary concern, his primary objective, and one that is heading through as of tonight, is to scrap the Football Act.
Brian, thank you very much for that. Rail travellers are facing a second night of disruption after a landslip closed the main Glasgow to Edinburgh route. ScotRail say engineers are still working at the site near Winchborough to make the line safe. Lisa Summers is at Waverley Station 4 is in Edinburgh this evening. What's the latest, Lisa?
Well, Sally, for a second night in a row, travellers arrived here in Edinburgh to hear the announcements that they were going to face delays or disruptions if they were travelling between Edinburgh or Glasgow. It was, of course, this landslip that took place on Wednesday because of the storms that caused the problems. The line has been shut. Since then, engineers have been working to clear the debris and then also to check the embankment and also to look out for underlying safety issues that could have caused further problems. But it did, of course, cause delays and crowded trains for many passengers right across the country. But David Dixon from ScotRail explained why it wasn't straightforward to fix the problem.
It's always difficult in dealing with something that was unexpected, and we've had to secure and pin an awful lot of the ground there. We've had to think about the site that goes slightly beyond the failure, make sure that that's safe, as well as then securing everything so that nothing else can come down, as well as I say, dealing with an overhead line mast which is in the same vicinity.
Just as we've come on air, Sally, I've just had the nod that actually the engineers have finished up on site. They will be leaving and the rail line has now been reopened. It will take some time for services to return to normal, and there will be some speed restrictions on the line just for the time being, but hopefully by the end of the evening and certainly into tomorrow, things are looking good if you are travelling on that line between Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Lisa, thanks very much. A big sigh of relief for commuters there. The former chair of the Scottish Police Authority says the Justice Secretary told him it was a bad decision to allow Chief Constable Phil Gormley to return to work while still under investigation for misconduct. But Andrew Flanagan told MSPs he was never explicitly asked to change his mind. Tonight, Mr Gormley's lawyer called for a fundamental review of the investigation. Stephen Godden reports.
A new day at Holyrood. More questions about the absence of Scotland's most senior police officer.
Still planning to join?
Phil Gormley denies a series of complaints made against him. He remains on special leave, but in November he was set to return until the Scottish Police Authority reversed a unanimous board decision. They did so after the Justice Secretary met this man, Andrew Flanagan, the SPA chair at the time, who today offered some fresh detail.
He told me that he thought it was a bad decision. It was clear to me that he did not want the Chief Constable to return at that point.
Andrew Flanagan described it as a short meeting. A few hours later, he said the pair met for a second time. Once again, the meeting was unminuted, but this time there were civil servants in the room.
It was clear that the Cabinet Secretary was still very unhappy, but he changed to discuss the process rather than the decision itself.
Michael Matheson.
Yesterday, the Justice Secretary insisted he hadn't abused his position, but had raised entirely legitimate questions.
That includes seeking assurances that the well-being of individuals involved in the complaints had been considered and appropriate bodies had been consulted.
Today, Andrew Flanagan told MSPs he hadn't explicitly been asked to change his mind.
I couldn't say that I had been directed to, but the position I was in, I felt I wasn't in a position to move forward with that decision.
So you felt you had no choice but to pause the decision?
Yes.
In response to the evidence, Labour said Michael Matheson should consider his position.
Where he then raised
there were exchanges too at First Minister's questions.
So the independent chair of an independent body has 2 meetings with the Justice Secretary, where in the first he's told he's made a bad decision, and after the second he's left in no doubt that he has to reverse it. How can that possibly tally with what SNP ministers have claimed in recent weeks?
First Minister.
Andrew Flanagan clearly said that he
It hadn't been requested by the Justice Secretary to change his decision, and he wasn't directed to do so. Questions were asked, and as I said last week, and I repeat again today, I absolutely am of the view that the Justice Secretary was right to ask those questions.
With seemingly no resolution in sight, tonight Phil Gormley's lawyers said the Chief Constable's professional reputation, career and welfare had been eclipsed by a public battle of wills. Describing the investigation as unworkable, they added it is hard to see how any fair process can follow given such public disagreement. Stephen Godden, reporting Scotland.
3 teenage boys have appeared in court charged with a knife attack on another boy in Glasgow yesterday morning. A 17-year-old and 2 16-year-olds allegedly punched, kicked and then stabbed a 14-year-old near All Saints Secondary in Barmulloch. They appeared in private at Glasgow Sheriff Court, where they made no pleas and were granted bail. Cameron House Hotel at Loch Lomond is planning to lose hundreds of staff after the fire that badly damaged the complex. Today, workers were told a consultation process will be launched to look at the roles of 300 people, including those on short-term contracts, to establish which positions will be axed. It's not known how many jobs in total will go. 150 employees involved in the golf course, the marina and ground staff will be kept on. Police have released CCTV footage of a man they want to trace in connection with a robbery at a newsagent's in Saltcoats. A man entered Wiley's newsagents on the 12th of January and threatened the female shop worker with a knife before making off with money. The woman's husband ran to her aid but collapsed in the shop and died later in hospital. A fatal accident inquiry has found that Glasgow City Council's failure to inspect memorials and cemeteries contributed to a young boy's death in 2015. Kieran Williamson died while playing in Craigton Cemetery on the city's south side. The council has accepted the FAI findings and apologised to Kieran's family. Katie Hunter reports.
Kieran's family have described him as a wonderful child who is missed every day. The 8-year-old was playing with friends in May 2015 when a memorial gravestone at this cemetery toppled over. A fatal accident inquiry has concluded his death might have been prevented. Sheriff Linda Ruxton found the absence of an active system of inspection to ensure the safety and stability of memorials in Glasgow cemeteries was a defect in Glasgow City Council's system of working, which contributed to Kieran's death and the accident resulting in his death.
We're really sorry that this happened, and obviously all of our thoughts are with the family and friends of Kieran. As a result of this incident, we have already taken action, so we now have routine inspections across all of our cemeteries and all of our memorials, which means that our cemeteries are now much safer, and we know that any memorials that may be of any risk to the public will be taken down immediately.
Those inspections were taking place this afternoon in Glasgow's eastern necropolis. Sheriff Ruxton has recommended the Scottish Government issues guidance on memorial safety to all councils. Kieran's mother has called for the law to be changed to allow prosecutions when failings are identified. Speaking through his solicitor, Kieran's father welcomed the inquiry's findings.
The determination that's been reached by Sheriff Ruxton today is a positive step, really, in change being made for the greater good. It's very disappointing to see that Glasgow City Council could have taken steps to prevent such a tragedy occurring. However, moving forward, it's focusing on the recommendations made by Sheriff Ruxton and ensuring that change does occur.
Kieran's family hope that change will save any other parents going through similar heartache. Katie Hunter, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
You're watching BBC Reporting Scotland. It's just short of 17 minutes to 7. A reminder of tonight's top story. MSPs have tonight voted in principle to scrap the legislation aimed at tackling sectarianism in football. And still to come, Brendan Rodgers clashes with the SFA over the scheduling of Scotland friendlies, saying his players need a rest. The family of a Dumbarton man detained in India say they're worried his case could drag on for years. Jagtar Singh Johal was arrested in Punjab last November. He's not been charged, but the Indian authorities say he's being investigated over the aiding and abetting of the murders of 7 people, which he denies. Poonam Taneja spoke to his family.
Leafing through an old family album and reminiscing about happier times,
When their son and brother Jagtar Singh Johal travelled from Scotland to marry his bride in India, they thought there would be many more such moments. That all changed when police in Punjab arrested the 30-year-old on suspicion of funding political violence.
If he was involved, then why is there no proof? There must have been some kind of evidence that they've got that they're talking about. Allegedly, they had said that it was bank statements, and to date, they've not produced those bank statements.
That was in November last year. Since then, the investigation into him has widened and he's being held in a high-security jail. His family in Scotland say they're worried about him.
Children always asking same thing. When's Jagtar uncle coming? When's Jagtar uncle coming? But we don't have any answer.
What's he being blamed for? He has been held for 90 days and we still don't know what they are going to do with him. Okay, if he has done something wrong, then let them bring the case so we can contest it.
Sikhs across the UK have campaigned for his release. His family say he's only a peaceful activist who went on marches for Sikh causes. But he also contributed to a website that honours individuals described as militants by the Indian government.
As far as I'm aware, his level of involvement was translating documents.
Looking at that website, it is sympathetic to people that the Indian authorities would describe as militants.
Okay. If there was any issues, then I don't think the UK government would have allowed any of the materials on that. So we have a freedom of expression in the UK, which we can use.
The Indian High Commission in London say Mr Johal is being investigated over the aiding and abetting of the murders of 7 people, and he's being dealt with under due process of Indian law. But almost 3 months after he was arrested, there's still no decision on whether to charge him.
Health officials say the winter flu outbreak appears to be easing off after a fall in the number of people admitted to hospital. Health Protection Scotland's latest report says that 102 people out of every 100,000 were reported as having the virus at the end of last week. That's the first drop in cases in a month. The Scottish Football Association and Celtic are embroiled in a row over international friendly matches planned for this summer. Celtic are writing to the governing body for an explanation as to why games have been scheduled at the end of the season in Mexico and Peru. They say their players need time off to rest. Here's our senior football reporter, Chris McLaughlin.
By the time Celtic lifted the Scottish Cup to complete the domestic treble last year, they'd played a total of 59 matches in just 10 months. This time, if they do the same, some of their players could be asked to delay any summer holiday plans and fly with Scotland for friendly matches in North and South America. Peru first on the 29th of May and then Mexico on the 2nd of June. Something that isn't going down well with the champions.
They're not machines, they're actually human beings, football players, and they need that mental and physical recovery at times. Some of the players had 6 days break last year, some had 10, and maximum any of the players had, that was the non-internationals, was 3 weeks. So back-to-back season, and then to do that again, you're not giving your players an opportunity.
No comment from the SFA for now, but it could ultimately result in Celtic withdrawing players who have made up the spine of the Scotland team in recent years.
Well, at this point in time, we don't even have a manager yet. So for me, I think it's obvious that Celtic players are very important to the national team moving forward, with the qualifiers coming up in September. But is it vitally important that they play in these 2 friendlies? No, it's not.
Celtic argue that those making the decisions here at the National Stadium could hinder their preparations for their Champions League qualifying matches. They have up to 8 in total this summer. But the fallout is hardly ideal either for a governing body that's already facing criticism for failing to land its top target for the Scotland job. Chris McLaughlin, reporting Scotland, Hampden Park.
6 Scots have been named in the British team for skiing and snowboarding at the Winter Olympics. The Games start in just over 2 weeks' time in South Korea. Murray Buchan from Edinburgh is one of those making the trip. And he's been telling our reporter Alistair Lamont about the impression he hopes to make.
As his place in the British Olympic team was announced, Murray Buchan was quite literally head over heels at the news. Pyeongchang will be Murray Buchan's second Olympics. He was 17th as freestyle skiing made its debut in Sochi, but with 4 years additional experience, what are his aspirations this time around?
I'd really like to make finals. I feel like I'm skiing well. I'm moving my run on. I'm progressing. So it's a goal for me to make top 10. I feel it's a hard goal, but I feel it's definitely achievable, and I feel like I'm coming into form. Last event went really well and managed to land a good run. So if all goes to plan, I feel like it's achievable.
As he works towards that goal, Buchan trains here in North Glasgow while in Scotland. But as this footage filmed by his coach shows, much of the hard work is done in competition around the world, most recently in Mammoth, California.
The events were as good as I could have hoped for. My last one went as well as I was planning, so that was great. It's a nice confidence booster going in.
Listen to what you know, not what you fear.
The Fearless is how Team GB have been tagged, and it's an apt title for Buchan and the 5 other Scots in the ski squad. The alpine skiing team includes Charlie Guest and Alex Tilley. In the cross-country team, Callum Smith is joined by Andrew Young, competing in his 3rd Olympics, as is Andrew Musgrave, who has a chance of being among the medals.
I think he can, yeah. He's been performing well. He's got some fantastic results. I really feel like if he has a good day, then it could be his. It's all about moving forward, and if you train smart, then hopefully you should be able to keep progressing, and maybe in 4 years' time we might have 4 or 5 medal hopefuls. But it's the Olympics. Pressure plays a big part in it, and you never know, someone could have a fantastic day and come out on top that you might not have thought otherwise.
Maybe that could be Murray Buchan. Alistair Lamont, reporting Scotland.
It's Robert Burns, as he's never been seen or heard before. On this 259th anniversary of his birth, Scotland's national bard was reborn in digital form. Scientists from Liverpool John Moores University have made a unique talking animation of the poet's head. Willie Johnson reports.
Wee sleekit, cour and timorous beastie, oh, what a panic's in thy breastie.
It's one of Burns' most famous poems, and here he is, apparently reciting it. This animation, the best attempt so far at replicating how Burns might have looked and sounded in the flesh.
But Moosey,
the idea came from fellow Ayrshire poet Rab Wilson, whose voice Rabbi has been given.
O mice and men gang after gley, and leave us noch but grief and pain for promised joy. This is the closest that we've got to how Burns would have looked in the life. You know, people will say, oh, he doesn't look like the portraits, or he doesn't look at the images we know of Burns. Well, this is the real Burns, and it's based in science.
For more than 230 years, this has been the accepted face of Robert Burns, frozen in time by Alexander Naismith in 1787. Now, 21st century science and technology has enabled new life to be breathed into the bard. The starting point was this skull cast, taken from Burns when his body was exhumed at the time of his wife Jean Armour's funeral.
We laser scanned that.
From the cast, a 3D head was constructed. Then came the complex task of adding the 4th dimension of speech and movement.
That's quite a difficult concept, and what we wanted to do is to keep it as realistic as possible. So to take real speech and movement and map that onto the Burns head. And it's only really been in the last few years that technology has allowed us to do that.
This is an amazing leap forward. You know, it has so many possibilities now. Burns can come alive and read his poems for kids in the schools. So it's got endless possibilities. Thou art blessed compared with me, the present only toucheth thee. But oh, I backwards cast my eye on prospects drear, and forward, though I canna see, I guess and fear.
Timeline's over on BBC Two at 7:30. Shireen and Glenn can tell us what's coming up.
Tonight, the pressures of body image for young men, with a rapid rise in the use of steroids to look more muscular.
We'll hear from Jonathan Watson about the return of sitcom Two Doors Down.
And you can see an extended version of our interview with Oscar winner Emma Thompson.
Plus, he's 77. Scotland's oldest skydiver will be dropping into the studio. That's Timeline, 7:30, BBC Two.
Join them if you can, but in the meantime, here's Cosser with the weather.
Thank you, Sally. Good evening to you all. Well, for tonight, things are going to improve. It's going to get drier and we'll have more in the way of clearer skies. You can see from the pressure chart, those showers will tend to fade away and clear, and the wind direction becomes more of a northerly, so things will get colder tonight and for tomorrow, but it will be largely dry before this weather system approaches for the start of the weekend. But we did have some lovely spells of sunshine across the country today too, in amongst the showers. This beautiful picture of the sunset sent in from one of our weather watchers in Dundee. And for the rest of tonight, for Burns Night, it will become largely dry. There's showers still around for a time, but they will ease and we'll have clear spells and it will turn quite chilly. Those showers across parts of the south and in the north, they may be wintry up over the hills, but lots of dry weather, and under those clearer skies, a widespread frost as temperatures dip to around freezing or below, maybe down to -4 Celsius for some of the glens in the Highlands. Some patches of fog around perhaps for the south where we have lighter winds, and then the risk of some icy stretches where we have untreated roads and surfaces and where surfaces are wet in the morning. There will be a lot of dry weather though, plenty of sunshine, especially during the course of the morning. By the afternoon, a bit more in the way of cloud coming in from the west. So if you're heading out around 3 o'clock, 1 or 2 isolated showers still around, but it's a dry picture. The best of the sunshine further towards the east, more in the way of high cloud in the west, and temperatures only reaching around 3 to 5 Celsius, so it will feel cold, especially where we have the colder spells in the far north. And then it's in the evening where we'll start to see that weather system approaching. It will bring some heavy and persistent rain for a time, some mist and murk, but some strengthening winds as well. Here we have that system, and you can see how tight the isobars are as well, so it will become quite windy, especially for northwestern coastal areas. For the Northern Isles, we could have gale to severe gale force gusts. And for Saturday then, here we have that rain, but it will clear out towards the North Sea, and by the afternoon, we're left with showery conditions, mainly across the northwest, and some sunny spells as well for the south and east, and milder conditions, 10 or 11 degrees.
Thanks so much, Cosser. Now, a reminder of tonight's main news. President Trump has told Theresa May he loves Britain and expects a tremendous increase in trade between America and the UK. MSPs of tonight voted in principle to scrap the legislation aimed at tackling sectarianism in football. The Scottish Government hoped to delay abolition until a new package can be put in place. And that is Reporting Scotland. I'll be back with the headlines at 8 and the late bulletin just after the 10 o'clock news. Until then, from everyone in the team right across the country, have a good evening. Bye-bye.